But if you notice in the question that I asked, what do you think other people think of us? Because again, it taps in and makes that link to our identity of, this is what's shaping my viewpoint. It's my perspective on my relationships. It starts shaping what I now think I need to do to please others. What it starts doing is shining a light on what is driving me and what is forming my identity.
Today on Strategy Short, I'm joined by Matthew Wood. Now, Matthew is a former teacher turned creative writer, and he's the founder of Wood Writes Words. Matthew, I'm sure you want to say a little bit about yourself and what you're doing in the world. So take it away and introduce yourself.
Hi, Dan. It's great to be here. I've been following your podcast for a few months now, and we both enjoyed how our connection and circumstances have brought us together. So it's great to be here. So I was a teacher and school leader for 15 years, and still would describe myself as an educator, and take the opportunity to do some tutoring when I get the opportunity, which is brilliant. But I reached the point, and we've talked off camera about this a little bit, that there's that sense of actually there are itches that still need scratching. There's more to give, there's more to do, and there's lots to explore. I had some conversations with various people, particularly my wife, who is an incredible advocate and support of myself and indeed our family taking risks and opportunities appropriately, and thought about, well, how many of the doors that you go through, how many of the doors that you go through are just one way and give you no way back, and how many are two way, and the reality is that the vast majority, if not all, are two way, and life is very short in terms of your ability to achieve all that you want to achieve. So within me, as a teacher, there was this desire and this love of writing, of communicating, of telling stories, and indeed a skill and a passion, and a repeated set of feedback that would be, wow, you just get that right. You hit the spot with that parent. You told that assembly, you shared that assembly or that story in the right way. You wrote that training piece just as we needed it to be said. And there was a longing indeed to say, well, actually, I want to see if I can explore this, and to see I need to give myself some space to really pursue this opportunity to write for businesses, whether that's blog content, social media posts, sales and marketing material. So I started pushing doors. I was handily called Wood in terms of Matthew Wood, and stumbled across the name Wood Writes Words, which is exactly what I do. And the reality is that I speak them as well. But what that enabled me to think about is, okay, is this something I can pursue? Is the value and the skills that I've nurtured and won in hard-fought battles over my teaching and education career, can this be used within a business setting? And the conviction increasingly became, yes, it can. Alongside that, and I've spoken and written quite a lot on that, my passion and care for education and teachers is still huge. Was a real desire as well to say, okay, I also want to do something else as well. So there was a big leap and a big opportunity to say, right, let's do this, let's pursue it, let's speak to some contacts, let's put myself out there, and here we are, Matthew Wood, Wood Writes Words.
And here we are. Now, I'm going to ask you in a moment about how you knew it was time to make that change.
Yeah,
because I think a lot of people feel when you're in a career path, it can sometimes feel like too risky, or the time is never quite right, and how you recognize that desire and action it, I think is a really challenging question for people. But let's come back to that in a second, because I wanted to say two things, because I think our story, our connection is really interesting, because you've become a friend of mine, I would say, in recent months. But it turns out that you're also the godfather of my niece, which to our listeners and viewers, this might sound like Matt's a stooge and I've invited him because he's my friend or he's kind of connected through my family. but we actually just connected through LinkedIn because you'd done a podcast with somebody about how identity powers growth. And I'm not sure where our conversation started, but at some point I saw that video through our conversation and I thought, Matt seems like a nice guy. I need to book a coffee with him. And so we jumped on this call. And I guess it was about 45 minutes into our conversation that there was little story hooks or little moments that then all of a sudden we're like, hang on a minute, we're sort of kind of related. And then it came about that you are my niece's godfather, which totally blew our minds. So that's just kind of a super weird cosmic connection that I think that we should call out. And it's wonderful that we've kind of got to this point.
Yeah.
But the other thing I wanted to touch on was the support of the people who love us, because I think it's worth me kind of giving a shout out to my wife as well, who is earning, she's paying most of the bills, she's putting bread on the table. And actually, she's the one who said to me, pursue this thing, pursue Anthem, pursue your own business for a bit. It obviously can't be something that we do forever, but it's really amazing how she's created the space and the security for me to go ahead and build something. And it sounds like that's a similar experience to the one that you've gone through as well.
Yeah, amazing. And I think, I think in terms of our connection, I think it's been really, and it will come back to your question. I think the godfather to your niece is actually just the tip of the iceberg. What we then, as we scratched the surface, we realized that there was a shared passion for males and well-being, for identity and understanding that actually there needs to be a real security in who you are. And from that, that's the springboard to move forward. And then a desire to shape culture. And that we talked about the fact that culture is either set to you or you do something about it. It's not neutral. You need to either choose to be at the whim of it or to do something. And it was all those things. And I think the connection with family was like, this is brilliant. So yeah, amazing to hear. I saw your post the other day, again, just lifting up your wife in terms of the support, and our spouses and partners are super important in that regard. And for me, actually, I described my, as I was in that sort of period of fear, of decision making, which is a tough space, but one that is always fruitful if you really invest in it. I describe my wife's voice as a lone voice sounding above the soapbox fears that were resounding in my head. Can I do it? What about this? What about the risks? What will people say? All of those things which can drive us, and they masquerade and they play at being sensible and rational, but really they're just fear wrapped up beneath. And my wife genuinely said, probably past midnight, she said, Matt, you've been Mr. Wood forever, and he's great, but everyone would benefit if you just wanted to be Matt for a bit. And I think, wow, you think that wisdom and those people around you, that idea of support, having those people around you who just know you. So the context is known, the understanding is there. And that can be close friends as well, of course, to someone who can speak in with that absolute precision into your circumstance and say, wow, okay, you can do this. You don't have to be Mr. Wood forever. You don't have to be what everyone wants you to be, or you feel that everyone wants you to be. Everyone would love to see Matt or Matthew. Liberating, freeing, validating, and a springboard to say, okay, let's do this. And then from that space, you think, I'm not doing this myself. I'm doing this. We're doing this together. And you go into the next part of your work journey, of your next part of your career, your next opportunity, thinking, right, I've got full reign to give this my best. And as a result, everyone who I work with is going to get my best.
You know, I think it's a really powerful thing to have that kind of champion in your world, like whether it is a family member, a spouse, whether it's a friend, to have that person. And if you're not sure who they are, maybe try and open the dialogue a bit and see if you can find that person. Because I'm aware that we're very, very fortunate that we've got those people in our lives. And some people, you know, have these dreams and have these visions, have these ideas, but perhaps haven't figured out who that person is yet, and maybe feel that they don't have that person. But if you are fortunate enough to have that cheerleader in your life, you know, take a moment today and show them some appreciation, because that's sometimes something that we can certainly forget to do.
I wrote a piece and I call those running mates. And those running mates come at different times. Sometimes they're your enduring ones, people you go back to. Sometimes they come for a small period, someone who speaks relevance and wisdom into your life during maybe a decision process. And other times they might just be those day-to-day running mates, your playground, parents in the playground, your coffee mates. But you need a spread of all of those people, those running mates who come alongside you. And yeah, it's great.
I love that. That's a great turn of phrase, running mates. But I wanted to speak as well to your comment about fear, right? And I think this is a kind of like a mini takeaway from me mid-episode. But a friend of mine reminded me recently that you are not your feelings, right? Your feelings, you are you, and your feelings happen and they come and go. They can be a bit like a tide. Sometimes the tide is in, you might feel a bit more stressed out. Sometimes the tide is out and there's perhaps a bit more breathing space. But
Yeah.
You are not your feelings. And a little technique that they introduced to me, a little practice, that if you're kind of facing something that's challenging, stressful, or something that is kind of giving you that sense of fear, is to practice this. When you feel it, say, it's just a feeling. Literally shrug your shoulders and just say that to yourself out loud, because you trigger different parts of your brain when you hear things. And just practice that. It's just a feeling.
Just a feeling.
And just see how that minimizes or brings back some perspective and takes fear. For example, this is the example that we've been talking about, could take fear out of the driving seat, put you back in the driving seat, because you're acknowledging it's just a feeling. But it's got to be something you say and something you shrug. So guys, if any of this is resonating with you today, that's just a little practice I encourage you to try. But Matthew, I know that you've been thinking about something for our audience today, something practical. Maybe it's an insight or a framework that you'd like people to try and experiment with.
Yeah.
So why don't you tell us what that is? But also I'm interested in who you're speaking to, like who's the person you are passionate about connecting with today?
Yeah. So I think specifically, I have a real passion and care for running alongside and supporting men. I think there's so much work to be done. There's some brilliant coaches on LinkedIn who I follow, who really speak into this idea of identity. And we know the terrifying statistics of phenomenal human beings who struggle with mental health, and we know the statistics relating to men above a certain age. So this specific framework would be for them on a personal level, but I also think any insight and understanding you have of yourself can be reflected in what you put in a marketing sense, in a story sense, in a narrative sense about who you are as a business and a brand. So that would be who I'm talking to, but anyone, I would say, who knows that they have a little nag or a feeling, just a feeling, that will come in and say, what do they think about me? How are the views of other people shaping how I view myself?
I'm excited to hear this, because I know that, one of the things that we love doing on the show is sometimes we're speaking to marketers, or sometimes we're talking about culture, sometimes we're speaking to team leaders. But so many of the resources and tools or thoughts that the guests bring are things that really apply to a whole bunch of different people. And what I love about what you're bringing today is that even if you're not in that kind of target group that Matthew's just described, this is going to be stuff that is going to help you. Like, it is going to be stuff that's worth reflecting on and thinking over and perhaps taking action on.
And as we set culture in ourselves and we get right thinking on who we are as people and our identity, then that is how you get the best workplace culture also, because you get people who are grounded and solid in who they are, which is just absolutely fantastic. So I spent 15 years of my career from 22 up to, should we say mid to late 30s, being Mr. Wood. And my name was always preceded by Mr. In a professional setting. And actually that then becomes part of who you are and shapes who you are and shapes how you view yourself. But it's also validating. So it's really, really important when there are transition points in life, when seasons change, that lovely metaphor in relation to life, then it's really, really important that you acknowledge, right, what have I built my identity on? So I just want to share a very quick exercise that I think is incredibly valuable, something that I've done with people in a workplace, with adults, and in addition with young people as well. it spans everybody. It's just why I chuckled a little bit when you say, "Who's it for?" It's just for everybody who needs to know who they are and to get a right vision and a right focus on their value. So what I would ask anyone to do who's watching is get a plain piece of paper and just to draw. It's not an art contest. Just to draw a head, an outline of a head, and don't fill in too much. Put some ears so you know it's a head, but don't draw the features inside because you're going to write inside. Now, inside there, just give yourself a minute. Don't write anything for a minute, and just very, very quietly, just think about what is it in those moments beyond midnight, those moments when there's a new challenge. What do we say about ourselves? What can we get us a bit of a handle on some of the narrative? Sometimes it's false narrative because we might be putting ourselves down unnecessarily. But what are the things that I say about myself? What you might find is that things come into mind from relationships, things that have been said to you, because whatever fires wires in that regard, and whatever we've heard, we start firing, we start wiring those thoughts of ourselves. And it might be, this isn't a one stop, this isn't a one and done, but it might be that you get a bit of an insight into, okay, what's guiding my thinking? What is it that is leading to the just a feeling moment that you mentioned, Dan? So it could be, I can't do, or it could be, I'm a nuisance. It could be, people are better. But it might be some of those things that come out and say, right, it could be, I've got to do better. And that's another trapping that we can fall into, that sense of striving. And once you've done that, okay, I want to then go outside of the head and answer this question in the same way. What do we think other people think of us? And write those phrases or thoughts around. Now, some of these things that we might write around the outside of our head might be super positive. Great guy, funny, always up, always positive, serious. It could, but it's really interesting because some of these things will be those things that other people do think about us. But if you notice in the question that I asked, what do you think other people think of us? Because it taps in and makes that link to our identity of, this is what's shaping my viewpoint. It's my perspective on my relationships. It starts shaping what I now think I need to do to please others. There's no fantastic one-off solution once you've done this, but what it starts doing is shining a light on what is driving me and what is forming my identity, what is forming how I view myself and how I attack and approach the next bit. So in the middle of the circle, give yourself a minute. What do I think? When I'm thinking of myself, what are the things that come into my mind? And then beyond that, what do I think other people think of me? And as you start making that link, you gain that insight, and you can gain some of that insight. Start scratching the surface of, who am I doing this for? Is this rooted in comparison and proving myself? These are things that might make super successful people. I've achieved quite a lot from in my teaching career, but it may not always. In fact, I would say those things very rarely produce a sense of peace and rest and wholeness and satisfaction that you can then build from going forward.
So we've got this approach really to tackle the big thing that most people don't know how to engage with in a meaningful way that produces some practical insights, some meaningful things to work with: self-reflection. Because we all talk about self-reflection, we talk about mindfulness, and there are lots of ways that we can approach those kind of subjects, but often they can be quite esoteric. They can be quite hard to get your head and hands around and do something practical with. What I love about this is that you really are, like you said, shining a light on some of your own unconscious drivers, and you're beginning to identify what some of the hard questions you might need to ask about yourself. Like, why do you think that? Why do you think that people would say that about you? Or why, what really resonates and what kind of got me in my heart is when you talked about what are the things you say about yourself after midnight? When you ask those questions, what are the criticisms that you might invite? But rather than actually listening to those criticisms, because what you were doing here is we're taking a slight step back and we're saying, we are going to acknowledge perhaps some of those negative thoughts that come into your head,
Mm.
but we're doing it through the lens of analysis. We're doing it through the lens of, what can I learn by recognizing I say this thing about
Yeah.
myself, which I think is a really powerful and practical starting point for people. Now, when people go through that process and perhaps they've identified or revealed or surfaced some challenging questions that they've asking about themselves, what do you think people could do with that next? Like, where do they take this piece of
Yeah.
work once they've done that?
I think it comes back to that phrase, running mates. I think comes back to, right, who is your network? Who truly knows you? Whose places value on who you are as a person and not on your achievements? And make sure that you are investing in those relationships and building time within those spaces that enrich who you are, define who you and what you think of yourself beyond the competitive edge, prove yourself well. I saw an incredible dance piece. I wrote a post on it a bit ago as well. It was actually describing, it was commissioned by the Arts Council, and it was describing the brain chemistry of our three big hormone systems. And we would have known the first two, the adrenaline system, the dopamine system. And this was based on a book called The Compassionate Mind by an incredible writer, Paul Gilbert. And what they were then describing and really focusing on as well was this third system that we often neglect, the oxytocin soothing system, which is like the referee or the regulator of those two big shouty ones. And it was incredible. My kids saw it. They were just captivated by the arts for an hour, which was just amazing. My daughter said, I needed the toilet from the beginning, but I didn't want to go. Brilliant. What an incredible endorsement. And I think the idea of getting alongside running mates and getting alongside a network who know you, who build you up regardless of your achievement, that is in such an important way to keep bringing you back to, I am more than what I achieve. And in terms of that, I just wrote a little phrase, which I think would work in. So then what does that mean? I'm just happy with who I am? No, settling. So ambition sees us better ourselves. We want to be our best, but striving limits our ability to enjoy it. My wife used to say to me, you do everything so well, you get everything right, and then you immediately focus on the things you could have done better. That's not a nice way to enjoy your achievements. So settling though and saying, okay, this is all I can do. Or settling will see us miss our very best. But satisfaction in who we are allows us to recognize what we've done and then build healthily as a springboard for the next part. And I think there's a dichotomy there between words that can sometimes get merged. So I've realized that there might be some fears, some things. Get alongside your running mates. Who are they? Identify them, reach out to them, get coffees with them, be real with them, start the conversation. I'm not okay. I've been thinking this. Those are two easy phrases to use.
Yeah, my encouragement to anybody who's listening or watching today, sometimes it can be difficult to know who that person is that you can really, really trust. Who's that kind of, I guess, accountability partner in a way, someone you can be really open with, someone who's not going to bring any judgment with them. So I would encourage people just to think through in your immediate network, maybe it's a friend, maybe it's family, maybe just start with the one person, right? Like if you're not sure who that person can be, don't try and think of a network or don't try and make it a big thing, but maybe just think through, who is the one person I can start with? And as you practice that vulnerability and that honesty with somebody, it'll then become a little bit easier to share parts of your story with other people, because you'll begin to understand the dynamics that occur in that kind of like open and honest relationship. And if you really aren't sure who that person is, you could always book in a couple of sessions with a coach. Like start with somebody who does this as a job, who can help you kind of find the best way to approach this kind of conversation. But I would encourage people to start there. Matthew, we're just about to come into land. We're almost done, which is a shame because I feel like we could really talk for a lot longer on this subject. It's so powerful and it's so engaging. But I wonder, you may have already said this, because the practicality of the framework and the tool you've provided is so simple. It's such a great starting point. We might have already covered this. But what's the one thing that you would encourage people to start with today? Like as soon as this episode finishes, what action would you like people to take?
Okay, so in terms of that, get alongside people, of course, but maybe in terms of your thinking, I mentioned at the beginning that there are very few one-way doors in life. They are doors that lead on to many other things. Being on a podcast with yourself, Dan, and realizing that we're more closely connected than we thought. So as you transition, so for example, for me, my life feels like it's gone, wow, there's so many possibilities. I'm still an educator, and I want to own all of those skills that I take, and I want to take those into the next part of my working life. I don't want to say, well, I was a teacher or education this. Actually, what we do, life's too short to just reinvent yourself fully over and over. And in fact, that's not healthy, because that just means we put things in categories that we think, well, not that anymore. No, as we go into the next part, or you go into your next challenge, embrace and take all of the skills, all of the challenges that you've learned through and grown through, and know that actually that is defining the success of the next part.
Matthew, so much good stuff for us to think and reflect on, and really powerful direction about how we can engage with those tough questions. But unfortunately, we have run out of road. But it's been great having you on the show. Thank you for making some time for Strategy Short.
Absolute pleasure.
And I hope we can speak again soon.
Thanks, Dan.